Hello, good morning and welcome to our virtual open day here in the Faculty of Business Law and Politics. Thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Heidi Westerdale and I'm your host for today. Sorry about the late start there. The presentation today is about politics and studying politics with us here at the University of Hull. Our presenter is Justin Morris, our Director of Student Recruitment and Lecturer of Politics as well. Justin is also joined today by Joe Dillon, our student ambassador, who will tell us more about his time studying politics with us here. Both Justin and Joe are available to take questions at the end, so please feel free to type in your questions during this live session, and we can cover these in the question and answer session afterwards. If we don't get a chance to answer all your questions today, please don't worry. Justin will be available on live chat for an hour after this session. And of course, following that, whenever you want to speak to us, we are here for you. So without further ado, it's over to Justin. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and let me join Heidi in welcoming you to this presentation. As Heidi says, my name's Justin Morris, and I look after admissions and also teach in the Department of Politics here at Hull. So let me start by showing you this slide. This is the staff within the department, and you're probably obviously thinking what a fantastically handsome bunch of people we are, but that's not why I'm showing you this slide. I'm showing you this slide to give you a sense of the areas in which we teach at the university. So I've arranged colleagues into the basic clusters in which they teach. My head of department here, Dr. Chris Martin, is in this cluster over here. So as you can see, war and security studies, international relations, political theory, and then British politics, political economy, and European politics. It's a bit more complicated than that, really, though, because we've also got colleagues who teach in additional areas as well. So Professor Tyler also joins myself teaching international relations, just picking out some random examples here. Professor Cohen Almagor teaches on the Middle East, and so on and so forth. I'll come back to this slide a little bit later on. Okay, so some very basic facts about the kind of numbers that we bring onto our degrees each year. And I just stress the point that this is very rough. So this is really kind of just indicative. So I won't run through all of the numbers because you can see them for yourselves. But the main one here that I would just draw your attention to is Brit-Pol and Ledge Studies, where we can take a maximum of 20 because this is a degree programme which involves students spending a year down in Westminster, and so we need to make sure that we're looking after all of our students while they're down there. Westminster and our ability to place students to study and work down in Westminster is a key feature of our provision here at Hull. Again, I'll come back to that topic a little bit later on. What I would also stress about these numbers is that these are the numbers of people on your degree programme, but they wouldn't be the number of people in a particular module or in a particular class. And the reason for that is that some modules are shared across degree programs. So for example, let's pick Introduction to International Relations Theory. Students on BA Politics, Politics International Relations, War Studies, and History Politics all study that module. So if you were thinking, oh, I wouldn't want to do that if there were only 5 people on the degree programme, that doesn't have a bearing on the number of people that you'd be mixing with in classes. So why might you consider studying what is effectively a non-vocational degree? I say that because most people who study politics don't want to go on to be politicians. Well, the first thing I would say in this regard, and this is borne out by this quote from The Guardian, but there's a huge amount of research that also demonstrates this, is that the actual subject that you study at university is not necessarily what most employers are looking for. The research indicates that about 2/3 of employers are looking for people who have studied at university level in pretty much any subject. because what they're really interested in is the kind of soft skills that you pick up during study. So ability to work as part of a team, management potential, interpersonal skills, analytical ability, ability to communicate and argue a point clearly. These are the kind of skills that can transfer from a huge array of different degree subjects. So given that statistic, the 2/3 of graduate vacancies are open to students, graduates from any subject, I would come down to the second point on this slide, namely, unless you're wanting to go into a vocational profession, so obviously if you want to be a dentist, I recommend you study dentistry. But if that's not where you are in terms of your career ambitions, then I would recommend that you study the subject that you are interested in. Because there's nothing more difficult than spending 3 years trying to study and face the challenges of university level study if you're not interested in the subject matter. So I would always suggest study what you're interested in. I would also add, though, that I think politics is a particularly good subject because it helps you prepare for the challenges that life throws at you. And to try to support my argument here, I'm recruiting this individual who is something of a historical figure now. But for those of you who don't recognize him, that is Donald Rumsfeld. And Donald Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense during the first George W. Bush administration. So we're looking at the turn of the century here. That does make it sound a long while ago, doesn't it? And he also was in that office for the first half of the second part of the second Bush administration. But Rumsfeld, I mean, he's famous for quite a number of things, quite frankly, but in particular, he's well known for having said that during a press conference. There are things that we know that we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we now know we don't know, but there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we don't know that we don't know. So when we do the best that we can and we pull all this information together and we then say, well, that's basically what we see as the situation, that is really only the known knowns and the known unknowns. And each year we discover a few more of those unknown unknowns. And as he said that, the press corps laughed. But what's really interesting about that quote is the more you look at it, the more you think about it, the more you realize that Rumsfeld was absolutely spot on. It's exactly that's the problem in life. It's the thing that you just, or things that you just weren't thinking about, you just weren't conscious of, that they went on your radar screen and yet they come along and they trip you up. And I would suggest that politics is a really good subject for helping you deal with those kind of issues in life. Because what you'll do, a big part of what you'll do during a politics degree is study topics where you don't have all of the information. And you know the stuff that you don't know, but you also have to be prepared for the fact that there are unknown unknowns. And there are various kind of intellectual skills that you can develop, strategies for coping with those kind of situations that come through studying politics. And that therefore prepares you really well for your life in the world of employment. So I think politics, if it's something you're interested in, think about studying it, not just because you're interested, but also because it will help you in the way that I've just outlined. So what is politics? And you might think, well, that's an odd thing to be asking us, Justin, because we've tuned into an open day webcast on politics. We know what it is. But actually, I think it's a little bit more complicated than you might at first imagine. So I'll come back to this slide, which is the one I showed you earlier on of myself and my colleagues. And you might, if you think about the kind of subject areas these people teach, they're really, and researching, they really are quite diverse. So for example, my esteemed colleague, Professor the Lord Norton of Louth, is an expert on parliamentary studies. Indeed, you may have read much of his material during your A-level politics degree if you're studying politics. So here is Professor the Lord Norton of Louth, and he's interested in the minutiae of parliamentary process. Whereas, for example, across here, my colleague, Dr. David Lonsdale, is interested in questions of nuclear deterrence and nuclear targeting. Many of us worry slightly that he seems to be more interested in targeting than deterrence, but that's a different issue. So what is it that ties Dr. Lonsdale's interest in nuclear weapons with Professor Norton's interest in parliamentary processes? Well, what ties all of those things together, and indeed what ties everybody together on that screen, is that everybody there is interested in power. In some way, shape or form, they are interested in power. For Professor Norton, it's the power relationship between Parliament, government, the European Union, the electorate, the media, and so on and so forth. For Dr. Lonsdale, it's a different type of power. It's military relations between states. For my colleagues who are interested in political economy, it's the relationship between private economic actors and governments and consumers and so on. So everybody in some way, shape or form on that screen is interested in power. And they're interested in particular in who or what has power and whether they should have it, the forms it can take, its use, its abuse, the purposes for which it's used and indeed abused, whether it can be constrained and whether it's shifting. And that's what I want to focus on for the remainder of this talk. So I'm going to run through some slides. If we were doing this live, I would be asking you, who are these people? What do you know about them? Unfortunately, we can't do that in the current climate. So I'll run through the people just to give you a sense of what it is that I'm talking about. So who or what has power? Okay, well, I'm sure all of you know who that is. That is our current Prime Minister. And it's not difficult to work out how it is that a Prime Minister, forget the fact it's Boris Johnson, it doesn't really matter, that the office holder of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has power over us in the sense that he or she leads a government which, providing it can get its policies and legislature through Parliament, is able to determine government spending, they're able to determine taxation policies, and a whole host of other things that have a direct impact on our lives. Similarly, and it's a beautiful thing there clearly, and that is, well, he is today the president, and he will be until January of next year. Who knows after that? We'll have to keep an eye on the results as they continue to come in. But that is obviously Donald Trump, the current US president. And it's again fairly easy to understand how the American president has power over us, because he leads what is by far the most powerful military power in the world, the largest economy, the most powerful diplomatic country. And that has implications, whether you love Trump or loathe him, whatever you think about his tweets, for example. When he tweets, global markets respond, and that has an impact upon everybody's lives. And in that sense, he has power. And then we can move on to another individual who, again, I suspect you will know, and that is, of course, President Putin, the premier of the Russian Federation. Now, if you believe what the media told you about Putin, you would think that he led a country which was, you know, almost as powerful as the United States of America. But that is simply not the case. You might, for example, be surprised to hear that the Russian economy is something like, or at least it was pre-COVID, not quite sure what the numbers are going to be looking like now, but the Russian economy is roughly somewhere between a half and a third of the size of the British economy. It's only about 1/15 the size of the US economy. So in that sense, because of the economic base which Russia has to project its power from, it's nowhere near as powerful as the United States of America. But what Putin doesn't have to deal with, which both Trump and Johnson do have to deal with, is He doesn't have to worry about an inquisitive media. He doesn't in practice have to worry about an electoral system. In other words, he's not massively accountable. And because he's not accountable for the way in which he uses his power, that has the effect of amplifying the power that's available to him. Another example is Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier. And just like President Putin, he too does not have to worry about being accountable for the manner in which he exercises power. And that has the impact of massively amplifying what appears to be the level of power available to the Chinese state. So we're already getting a sense here that power is multidimensional. It's not just about the assets that you have, how wealthy your country is, what kind of military it has. There's also a political context in which that power can be exercised. Another way of thinking about this is to think about somebody like this individual, which is obviously Pope Francis. What kind of power does a pope have? He doesn't have any economic power to wield. He doesn't, or not any significant economic power. He doesn't have any military power to wield. His predecessors used to have, but he doesn't. And yet he has hundreds of millions of adherents around the world. What kind of power does that give him? Or, to go to the other extreme, that who is that, you might wonder, those of you who aren't sure, that is, or was at least, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He's now dead because he was killed by an American military strike. But he was the head of Daesh, or what the media insist on referring to as so-called Islamic State. Now, if you believed what some politicians and certainly the media would have us believe about Daesh, you would think that it posed an almost existential threat to Western civilization. Well, the frank truth is it doesn't, and it never did. And the reason it doesn't and it never did is because it simply doesn't have that kind of power. The Soviet Union posed an existential threat to the West during the Cold War, as we did to the Soviet Union. But Daesh was never in that position because it simply isn't powerful enough. But what appeared to make Daesh more powerful than it was that Baghdadi and his adherents were willing to exercise the power that they had, to use the power that they had in an almost utterly unrestrained manner. They were willing to commit the most heinous and brutal of acts. And so that again has this effect of magnifying power. A different type of power, I would suggest, is wielded by that individual, and that is, of course, Dominic Cummings, the senior advisor to the current British Prime Minister. What kind of power does Cummings have? And should he have it? He's not accountable. He's not elected. He's very, very rarely open to question, to cross-examination in any way, shape or form. So we're getting into questions here, not just about whether people have power and what kind of power they have, but how comfortable we are about the amount of power they have and the manner in which they can wield it. I don't know if many of you will recognize that individual, but you will definitely be very, very familiar with the company which he heads up, because that is Sundar Pichai, and he is the boss of Google. And I would suggest to you, not in a military sense, of course, and yes, to some extent in economic terms, but I would suggest that Google is an immensely powerful actor. And the reason I would say that is because of our reliance, the way in which we look to Google for information, and the fact that the information that they give us is based on a whole set of complicated and complex algorithms which go back through our browser history. So I could ask a question, and another individual could ask Google the exact same question, and we would get different answers based on the algorithms that Google use. And so the question then is, what kind of power does that give Google? And I would suggest that we don't really know the answer to that yet, but we're probably pretty sure it does have power, but as yet there's much more analysis required on the power of that kind of actor. Another example might be that young lady, and that is, as I'm sure you know, and you probably know a lot better than I do, that is Zoella, one of the world's great internet blogging sensations. Last time I checked, which I have to confess is quite some time ago, she'd had something like 835 million hits, so not that far short of 1 billion hits on her various web presences. What kind of power does that give her? And how can that be? How is that accountable? Can it be controlled? Does it need to be controlled? All of these are questions about power. I don't know who that is, and all I can say is that he doesn't really have a great deal of power. Many of those people that you see on that screen have power over him, but sadly he is disenfranchised. He has very little power even to control his own life in many ways. It was once suggested to me in an open day that he had power over the dog that you see in the picture, but I suspect if anything it was the other way around. I suspect he was more dependent on the dog than he was than the dog was on him. And this is also somebody who has very, very, very little power. And as difficult as it is to look at that slide, I put it up there because that is the ultimate manifestation of disparities in global power. Okay, so who or what has power over you is based or depends on a complex and diverse array of factors. Let me show you what I mean. That is me, shirt and tie, a bit smarter than I am now. And that, for those of you who haven't seen her picture already, is the university's Vice Chancellor, Professor Susan Lee. And Professor Lee has power over me because of the structure within which we interact, namely the university, because she is my ultimate boss. And the decisions that she makes can have a very, very profound impact upon me. But that is purely structural power. If and when I left the employ of the university, or Professor Lee did likewise, she would have no power over me. It's only to do with the structure through which we interact with one another. Where you are has an impact upon the kind of power you have. I'm sure you're aware that that is the North Korean premier. Unfortunately, he doesn't really have power over any of us here in the UK, but he does have almost unlimited power over the citizens of North Korea. And of course, if he were ever able to get his hands on one of those devices and be able to deliver it, he's probably got the nuclear capability but not the delivery capabilities currently, then he might have power on a wider geographical scope. Currently, fortunately, he doesn't. But my point is that geography still matters. What also matters is how you understand power. So that, of course, is Mao Zedong. And Mao had a very particular view of power. His view was political power grows from the barrel of a gun. So Mao saw power very much as a coercive entity, as did that individual, and that, of course, is Joseph Stalin, the former head of the Soviet Union. And that, now here, if only we'd have been live in a lecture room, you would have an opportunity here to win £10, anybody who could tell me who that was. That is Pope Pius XI. Why have I got a picture of Pope Pius XI on a slide with Joe Stalin? It's because Stalin famously asked a question about that Pope. His question was, the Pope, how many divisions has he got? Because Stalin, as I've already said, shared this view of power with Mao, that it was really about an ability to coerce. Ultimately, what mattered was military power. But what's really interesting about that exchange is that, of course, the answer was none. Pope Pius XI didn't have any military power, and yet the Catholic Church is still going strong, whereas the Soviet Union is now consigned to the history books. So what does that tell us about power? It probably tells us that it's more complicated than just military power alone. And so we can think about power in different forms. We can think about hard, coercive power, assets that enable, for example, governments to force other actors, be they their own citizens or other countries, to do as they would have them do. But equally, we can also think about power in the terms of soft power. So this is power that persuades other actors, that attracts other actors to join with you in a particular endeavor. And that might come through the soft power associated with brands and culture, so musical culture, film culture, etc. It might come through the soft power associated with rights and values, the democratic values that we are so fortunate to enjoy in the West are things that literally attract people from all around the world because they want to be able to enjoy those same rights. And information control can also give or generate soft power. And as I say, these things literally attract people. Now, they may do so through official routes, such as depicted there. And of course, as we all know all too well, often people are so attracted and so desperate to improve their lives that they're willing to risk those very lives in order to get to those more attractive places. And you may, of course, believe that in part that is a product of economic concerns, and undoubtedly it is to some extent, but people are willing also to risk their lives because of the type of lives that they can lead, because of the soft power assets, the democracy, the liberty, the rule of law and so on that prevails in the West, which doesn't prevail in so many other parts of the world. So then we need to think briefly about questions around the use and abuse of power. And here things get much more contentious, and it very much depends really upon your own political and ethical stance. So we might think in terms of use and abuse by thinking of particular individuals. So there we have Nelson Mandela. Now, if we were doing this live, Nelson Mandela would almost always be getting cheers from my audience because most people think that he exercised power in a very rightful manner. And we can think of people on the other extreme of the spectrum, somebody like Hitler. I don't need to go into detail, I'm sure, as to why it is that we think that Hitler committed appalling abuses of power. And of course, tragically, millions of people died as a consequence of his brutality and of the brutality of the regime which he led. But they're actually quite easy cases because they are so extreme. It's the cases in the middle that are more contentious. For example, former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. For some people, Thatcher is a British political hero. For others, she's more cast in the mould of a villain because she certainly exercised power and authority. Some people think it was a use and some people think it was an abuse. And that very much depends, as I say, upon your own political and ethical standpoint. And that's what opens up the space for political debate and the kind of discussions that you would have in tutorials if you studied politics. Here's another example, which is Edward Snowden. Snowden was a private military contractor working for the American National Security Agency, and he discovered that the American government, and indeed a number of other Western governments, were using their surveillance capabilities to do what's referred to as a dragnet information haul on their citizenry, and it was illegal for them to do so. Now, what Snowden did about that is he went public and leaked this information to the media. For some people, Snowden is a hero for doing that because he unmasked an illegal abuse of government power. For others, he's a traitor because he was bound to secrecy, and his critics would say he endangered the lives of those who work in the service of the state and the citizens of the state. Now, again, where you sit in that debate is going to depend upon your own political and ethical standpoint. But hopefully you can get a sense of how discussing a case like this opens up great opportunities for very exciting and interesting classroom debate. And then there's more. I'm conscious of time, but we could talk about the distribution of power. how quickly it's moving, the ways in which it's changing. So are we, for example, witnessing a significant shift in power from the United States of America to the People's Republic of China? I would say we are seeing a shift. I would say the size and speed of that shift is currently exaggerated in most media reports, but clearly power is to some extent on the move. Brexit, you may have forgotten about Brexit. It seems to have disappeared almost from our TV screens of late, but Brexit was ultimately, or certainly in large part, a debate about power and where it should be located. Should it be located with the government in 10 Downing Street, in Parliament with the elected MPs, or the institutions of the European Union? That ultimately is a question about where power should be, how it should be exercised, how it can be constrained, where it should be located. Even the current COVID pandemic is really a question about power in many ways. It's about the power that we think we have to shape the world in which we live. Those hard power assets, which are depicted to one side of your screen, they really don't help. They are ultimate objects of power projection, but they don't project power against a threat like COVID. So what does that make us see? How does that make us think about the power that we as human beings have to protect ourselves and to shape our lives and our futures? Now, if you're interested in these kind of subjects, these kind of discussions, then I suspect you're probably seriously interested in studying politics. And if you're interested in studying politics, then I, of course, hope that you're interested in studying politics at Hull. So I'm just going to say just a couple of very quick things about why I think that's a great idea and what it is that I think sets Hull apart from other politics departments. And I could talk here about all sorts of things: our internships, study abroad, research-led teaching, the inclusivity of our culture, the way that we relate to students, which I suspect Joe will talk about a little bit later on. But I'm going to pick on the one thing that is genuinely and literally unique about this department, and that's our ability to place students in Westminster, because we have a truly unique relationship with the Palace of Westminster. And that relationship is based really around our ability to allow students to take, as part of their degree, a placement learning opportunity. If you're doing British Pol-led studies, it's an integral part of your degree. It's 1 year in Westminster, it'd be the 3rd year of a 4-year degree. For all of our other degree programs, you have an opportunity to apply for a Westminster placement, and if you're successful in that application, which is, I must stress, competitive and selective, then you would undertake that Westminster placement during the first half of your final year, where you would be working for an MP as their research assistant down in Westminster. So that moves me on to my final slide, which is career prospects. And it's a very difficult issue to cover, really, when you're working in a politics department, because politics graduates go on to do a very wide array of occupations. Now, private sector, Her Majesty's Armed Forces and the media, we've got a lot of students who move into those. The Civil and Diplomatic Service, up until recently, the person who led fast stream recruitment to the civil service was a former Hull politics graduate. Third sector is the charitable sector. Education and academia speaks for itself. And many of our students go on to join the mafia. Now, don't worry, this isn't the mafia that you may have seen depicted on your television and film screens. This is the so-called Hull Mafia. And this is the name that's been given to Hull graduates and Hull students working in and around the Palace of Westminster. Back to this point about this unique relationship we have with Westminster. And that name came about because there are so many of these students. This is a name we use. This is a name that was coined down in Westminster. There are so many politics graduates and students from Hull down there that when asked, where are you studying? Where did you study? And people say Hull, the standard response has been, another member of the mafia, because they are everywhere and you never quite know when you're talking to a Hull graduate. So I shall leave you on that particular point. I look forward to answering any questions you've got, and I shall hand over. I'm not quite sure whether I'm handing over to Heidi or to Joe, but I'm definitely handing over to someone.
Well, thank you, Justin, and hello, everyone. I'm Joe. I graduated this summer from the University of Hull with a degree in history and politics. And it was only a while ago that I was in your position. And back then, I knew two things. The first one is I knew I wanted to go to university. And the second is that I knew I had a passion for politics. But I didn't know which university I wanted to go to. I'd applied for many universities. I've been to many open days, but I wasn't quite sure. And one of the universities I applied for was the University of Hull. And when I went to the applicant day, it was that day that really made me want to study politics at Hull. And it was two events that really sort of cemented my decision to come to Hull. And the first was the presentation delivered by Justin Morris. And it was during his presentation, he talked about viewing politics through the prism of hard and soft power. How historically countries like the United States and the Soviet Union were equal in terms of nuclear capability. But when it came to the sort of soft power of democracy, of human rights, of freedom of speech, the United States had far more soft power than the Soviet Union, and how soft power can sometimes be more powerful than hard power. And I've never really viewed politics in that sort of or that dynamic before, and it made me curious and made me want to study more and learn more about it and come to Hull. And the second event during that day was the opportunity I and fellow applicants got to participate in a seminar with the lecturers in their offices. And it was the first time that the lecturers at any university really had shown an interest in why we as students wanted to study politics. What motivated us about politics? Was it climate change? Was it party politics? Was it racial justice? And also, some of the lecturers mentioned their interest in politics, their speciality in politics, and it was a very good sort of discursive environment where we all participated, talking about politics and talking about global events that were taking place at the time. So it was those two events of the presentation delivered by Justin Morris and the opportunity to participate in a seminar that really made me want to study politics at the university, at Hull University. And yes, it was those two events. And more broadly, actually going to university, some of the sort of concerns I had was, is this the right decision for me? Am I going to be good enough? What level of support will I get? And when I came to the University of Hull in my first sort of week or two, it was very obvious from the start that I was going to get a wide range of support at Hull. And that is true, that you get a lot of support at Hull. And one of the really good levels of support you get is the contact hours. And these are office hours that lecturers set aside for students, where you can go to their offices, and if you have, it's about 2 to 3 hours a week, their office hours. If you have a particular issue to do with an essay question, or maybe one of the lectures, you didn't really quite understand one of the theories they were talking about, it's a fantastic opportunity to sort of go to their office during the office hours in the week and just, talk to the lecturer. They're very nice, they're hospitable. Some of them offer biscuits. I'm not sure if Justin does. I know Justin will probably have to answer that. But it's a fantastic opportunity to really sort of get to know your lecturers, and they're more than welcome to wanting to get to know you as well. And also the academic support team is another sort of place to go to if you're looking for that sort of transition from sort of A-level writing up to academic writing. It's a very good asset to use here at the University of Hull in the library. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. They're more than happy to help you, especially when it comes to first year writing, when it comes to referencing, structuring essays, etc. They're a fantastic, brilliant team, and I would encourage you to utilize it if you do decide to come, especially in your first year. And also, this may not affect everyone listening to this, but if you do have a specific learning difficulty, whether it be dyslexia like myself, the university offers a lot of support for students with specific learning difficulties. I was given a scribe, and extra time in my exams. I was also given a cover sheet to make the marker aware that I suffer from a specific learning difficulty, so they wouldn't dock off marks for small grammatical inaccuracies. So the level of support is really, really good here at the university, from the pastoral support, from the academic side. So it's a fantastic. So it really set me, really made me at ease coming to the university in the first week or two, or maybe month even. And more broadly about Hull as a city, we've got a fantastic relationship with the community. It's often called the town and gown. That sometimes university, there's a hostility amongst the locals. Oh, those pesky students, how dare they, etc., etc. That doesn't exist at Hull. It's fantastic opportunity. It's fantastic relationship we have with the community. We all look after one another, and it's a brilliant environment. It's safe. We all care for one another, etc. So Hull as a city, yeah. So they've got the community. You have the history of Hull. The history of Hull when it comes to the William Wilberforce Museum. William Wilberforce, the 19th century slave campaigner for the abolition of slavery. You have the Maritime Museum. So there's a wealth of knowledge and history in Hull. And just like I said, reiterate, it's a very safe and pleasant environment to be in Hull. And Justin alluded to it in his presentation about the opportunities that are available to you in your final year of study. And one of them, or three of them actually, is a study abroad, a work placement, or the WIP scheme in Westminster. You can apply for all three, but you only can pick one, or you don't have to apply for any of them. You can continue your degree as you are. So I chose to apply to do the study abroad with many of the partner universities available at Hull, from North America, Europe, Asia. I chose to study abroad in France. My course was taught in English in Bordeaux, that is, the Sciences Po Bordeaux. And I learned a wide variety of French modules, from French political history, the French economy, trying to recall the modules, French journalism, French as a foreign language. And it was a brilliant opportunity to meet people from right across the world, make new friends, travel across France and various places. And I say with a lovely French family. They did have a very annoying cat that was, I could give a presentation about the how annoying that cat was, but putting that to one side. But it was a brilliant opportunity. I got to study abroad, really. And if you are sort of more looking to study in a different culture, that's one of the options that's available to you here at the university. And you may want to apply for all three, but you only can pick one. And so if you are coming to the university, which I hope you do, one of the things I would say in your first year especially is utilize all the opportunities that are available to you. Join the sporting societies, join the non-sporting societies. I'm a member of the Rock Climbing Society. Last year we went to Mallorca, so that was a fantastic opportunity. I got to sort of do outdoor climbing in Mallorca in Spain. And there's an indoor rock climbing facility in Hull. Admittedly, it's not the university, but it's in the city, so that's an opportunity. So any sport you're interested in, or non-sporting society, whether it be politics society or games society or film society, etc., really join those societies. It's a fantastic opportunity to meet new people, learn new activities, make friends for life. And so just to round it all up, because I'm conscious of time and allowing for Q&A, to round it all up, I would say that Hull offers that wealth of knowledge about politics. The lecturers really do care and want to engage with their students, and there is that really good relationship available for the students and the lecturers when it comes to the learning activities and learning engagements. I would say that Hull as a city is amazing, and you can also, the one last thing to add is that you can actually join, as Justin said, the Hull Mafia. So you could be the next Don Corleone. So at Westminster, that is. So I'll hand back to Heidi, and we'll go back now to question and answers to see if anyone has any questions at all.
Thank you so much, Joe. I love Joe's passion there when he talks about his experience of studying politics at Hull. It's absolutely lovely, and it just makes it so real. And I hope the viewers are finding that as well. I really do. We are running really short of time today. We do have Justin for the next hour actually on live chat. So if anybody wants Justin, do pop your questions. I'm sure if you know, you're wanting to ask questions further on another day or another time, you know, myself, Justin, certainly are around to talk. Equally, if you speak to your school or college as well, you know, we are happy to come into your school or college there and speak to the staff there, or to yourself and to some of your fellow students as well. We've answered a lot of the questions, actually. We've had questions in there about Politics Society, which Joe's covered for us, which is fantastic. The other thing is about coming to a school or college. Yes, we can. That's brilliant. There is a theme here, a couple of questions coming in on the support you would get. So if you did go on the BPLS programme or you were down there in Westminster, do you still get support from a member of staff in Hull? So Justin, do you want to answer that one before we close?
Yes, so there's a number of ways in which you get support. Most directly on a day-to-day basis, Lord Norton is in the palace certainly 3 days a week, and he runs a whole host of seminars, and he's available for students to contact him while they're down there. But we also have a dedicated member of staff based up in Hull who's in virtual contact with the students throughout their time down in Westminster. She's actually a former BPLS student, so she's seen things both from the student side of the table and from a university side of the table. And this comes back to what I was saying about only sending a certain number of students down to Westminster in any given year. We actually have far more capacity in terms of MPs than we have students that go down there. And the reason that we keep the numbers reasonably constrained is because we want to ensure that while they are there, we can fully support them with everything that they need.
That's brilliant. I think what we will do is leave it there. You know, as viewers, you've got the option to contact any of us here, or at least anybody across the wider university as well, the bigger team. So look, without, you know, we'll close it there. A massive thank you to Justin and to Joe for joining us today and giving their overview of the politics programmes here at Hull. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.